Okay, so welcome back to another payment talk. I'm really, really excited to welcome today an old friend of mine, Paul Stoddart of Mastercard, who is president of new payment platforms there. Paul, welcome.
Thanks, Nick. An old friend. We're both a little older now, aren't we? And delighted to be here and talk to you and the rest of the gang.
And thank you for joining us from your fitness cave.
yeah, it's all for effect. You know, some people have suspicious books on their bookshelf that they clearly never read or should have removed. But my fitness equipment, there is actually a purpose, as I've said to you before. We are racing another family across the Atlantic, so it is getting some use, but more by my daughters than me, I'm afraid.
I love it. Okay, well, let's talk about open banking, Paul. So that's the division of Mastercard that you're running is all about the kind of diversification away from just cards.
Yeah.
So how do you see open banking playing out, first of all, in the UK?
In the UK, I'm always pleased to see that innovation remains at the forefront of the agenda for most of the participants in the market. So it was good to see the UK banks make some early moves in open banking. And I think maybe it's because they realise that it's not just a threat to them. Actually,
it's an opportunity, right?
Exactly. And, you know, I've talked about this before when I do sort of conferences and other presentations, that the banks are in a good position to reinvent themselves a little bit here. You know, as a consumer and as a business, I am looking for my financial services institution to be the trusted custodian of my data, whether that's, you know, personal data or whether that's, you know, business data or transaction data. And I don't think anyone has really claimed that ground. I don't think that those that have tried have really held principles and values and standards to a high enough level. And so when you talk to consumers, they are looking for their bank, for their financial services provider to be that trusted partner.
Yeah.
So it's good to see that the banks have made some bold steps in this direction. It's an ecosystem and it will take time.
And I guess they're also looking across the channel, the British banks, and seeing what's happening in, you know, more widely in Europe. I was talking to Eric from Nordea last week about P27. Are you guys involved in that, or is that complementary to what you're trying to do?
So P27 is very much are probably the biggest thing we've got going on in the Nordics at the moment. So we were successful in winning that contract to implement and it's going to be the first in many ways. Actually, it's going to be the first multi-currency real-time payment system. It's going to be the first that brings together 4 countries.
Yes.
And there's a long roadmap of capability that will be delivered over a period of time. And so it's really, I think, thanks to the forward-looking Nordic banks, actually, who I think were just somewhat unsatisfied with what was going on at a domestic level in each of their markets. And so it's the banks that came together.
And what's it like, Paul, being inside a card scheme, trying to talk about non-card payments? Is that weird?
Well, we've talked about this publicly since the acquisition of Vocalink, and really the acquisition of Vocalink was the manifestation of a strategic move that Mastercard has chosen to move away from being solely a provider of technology and services and scheme, etc., in the card space, to really take itself into the wider payments landscape. And that wider payments landscape is, in terms of total flow, is at least 5-6 times the size of the card flow space. And so it's not, you know, it's a very, I would say, a very natural step
Sure.
For someone that's been able to be as successful as it has been in the card space.
But does it mean you're kind of constantly having to fight your corner for funding and so on, or is actually does the difference mean, the fact that you're different mean that it's in some ways it's easier to have those conversations?
So it's more about education. So the support that I get from Michael and Ajay and the board has been tremendous. They have, when they say they're going to do something, it isn't like some organisations where they do it for 6 months and then as soon as something happens, it all gets forgotten. And COVID has been a very interesting test for that. Actually, the support at board level has been tremendous. It's really about education in let's call it the regions, because to really leverage the global distribution capability that Mastercard have, it means leveraging the capability and the resources and the people in the regions. And so it's really an education mission that we...
I guess that's actually true for consumers as well, right? Particularly in strongly card-dominated countries like the UK, there's a kind of education piece for consumers to understand what the proposition is and why they might want to pay this way rather than with a card.
So if you look at the application of ACH in real time at the point of sale, yes, I think you're right. Do consumers really care how the payment... I think our job is to make it almost invisible for them.
I guess it's more. I agree that they don't care in one sense as long as it works. But what they do care about is stuff that is different or is other.
Yeah, and so actually we also forget that a lot of these markets around the world have adopted real-time payments and have been running real-time payment systems, in a significant way for several years now.
Yeah.
And so, we do often talk about the UK being at the forefront, and it very much is. And we're now into sort of second generation thinking around real-time payments. But a number of markets outside of the UK and outside of Europe have been very successful with their implementations of real-time payments. And
I've been really interested to see the emergence of prompt pay, for example, in Thailand, where it's not just prompt pay, but lots of wallet-based solutions really taking off there.
Yeah, and that's one of the exciting things about the solution in Thailand. For the central bank in Thailand, they had a number of objectives when they embarked on their modernisation program. Reducing cash usage in the economy was one. Increasing inclusion was another. And reducing risk and fraud and so on. And so Prompt Pay does a lot of things for them. But wallets were an integral part of that increasing inclusion objective, because they recognised that a lot of citizens either don't use their bank account as their primary everyday payment source, or don't have a bank account.
Yeah.
But they might have a mobile wallet or some sort of digital wallet provided by another party. And the central bank was very keen to ensure that didn't create a sort of separate off central bank money pool of funds.
Yeah.
And so by bringing wallets into the ecosystem,
and the kind of retail ecosystem.
Exactly. So it doesn't matter whether you use a bank account or a wallet, you can actually use the Prompt Pay system, and they're interoperable, fully interoperable, which I think was a first. I don't believe that was happened anywhere else. We now see it as, every country wants it on their roadmap. So.
And one of the things about open banking is that there's a kind of this slow incremental change as things kind of coming up. I likened it a bit like boiling a frog. The temperature's going up incrementally and the frog never jumps out. What are the kind of signs that maybe we would be able to kind of step back and say, well, actually, open banking is really here in the UK or in a particular market?
There are lots of little signals that I'm looking for. Obviously, bank enablement is one.
Yeah.
Moving beyond the standard API set is another. So we talk about premium APIs, but APIs that enable a much richer set of engagements and transactions to happen. Therefore, moving beyond just getting kind of static data out of the bank. What is the interest rate on the account, and who are the utility providers I use, those sorts of things, into making them transactional. Because a lot of open banking flows at the moment are data related and not payment related.
Sure, well, data and identity, right?
Exactly. So I'd expect to see those payment flows start to increase. And actually, I think it needs to move beyond open banking. I don't see why the banks should be the only participants that are required to make access available to my data. I would like all companies that hold my data to be subject to those same rules and standards.
Sure.
And the technology agility that's required, both in terms of the service provider, for which Endava continues to be a tremendous partner for us. But that agility is really important because we're trying to deliver services into an ecosystem and meet the needs of different participants in that ecosystem. So there's some signals coming, but like most things, it's not revolution. It's
it's evolution, exactly. Paul, unbelievably, we are out of time. So all it remains for me to do is to thank you, and the guest appearance from your window cleaner. It's always nice to have a little guest star. So, Paul, thank you so much, and hopefully get to see you soon in the flesh somewhere in the world.
Really appreciate it, and lovely to talk to you and everybody else. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul.